have I got my equipment yet? Unfortunately, the answer is no, not yet.
Okay.
So it's still, I think the equipment is still sitting in Mexico City. I'm still sitting in Cancun. But I've been talking to one company who've been really helpful, who might be able to just ship the equipment straight to the US without me, which makes me a tiny bit nervous because I want to just be holding it in my arms. But still, it's better than nothing. And I mean, the worst case scenario is that equipment doesn't get back to me at some point. So just sort of desperate for that to happen at any way possible. But hopefully you can have a meeting about it tomorrow, actually. So maybe there'll be some updates then. Fingers crossed, please.
Well, absolutely. We are all going to be keeping our fingers very much crossed for you. I know I certainly will. So we talked a little bit in our first interview about you going to board a ship in the US. It's a ship containing liquid natural gas, is that right?
Yes, exactly.
Okay, and you're going to be measuring methane emissions from that ship. So tell me a bit about what you're ultimately looking for from this piece of research.
So there's a few things that we're looking for from the research. So the things that we want to get out of this is, well, first, as I think I mentioned the first time around, this is a sort of first of a kind study. And I think what we're trying to gauge is how do you actually measure methane emissions on a ship? How can you do that effectively? So it's a bit of a trial. It's a bit of a sort of pilot study to work out what's the best way of doing it. Because as we were saying before, it's a bit expensive and there are lots of different types of sources of emissions that you might see. We just don't know. So for example, you might see emissions mainly coming from the engine. You might see emissions coming from the process plants that they've got actually on the ship, or you might see them coming off the storage vents. There's a bunch of places that you could see. We just don't really know. So what we're hoping for, firstly, is to say, well, how are we actually going to be able to effectively measure these? And also the second thing we want to get an idea of is it a big deal? Are the emissions like significant? Is it significantly large enough for us to have to do more of an assessment? Now, the kind of one of the big problems is that so LNG carrier ships, liquefied natural gas carrier ships, there's quite a lot of them in the world. There's over 500 of them, all dotted about the place, and they are really, really different from each other. So there's lots of different sizes, different ages, different companies that operate them, different sort of like different regions, stuff like that. So what we're not going to say from this one study is, what's exactly the emissions that we see from all types of LNG carrier ships, because it's not going to be a representative sample, if you see what I mean. But it gives us one measurement, one measurement campaign, and it gives us an idea of how we can do it in the future. Because what we really need is to work out how can we get a representative sample.